Well, let's debate some of the changes being proposed in the economic update from the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, today. Toby Sanger is the Executive Director of Canadians for Tax Fairness, and Ian Lee is an Associate Professor in the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. Good to see you both again.
Pleasure.
We've been in to talk before about economic issues, and here we are again. Who likes the economic update?
I like parts of it.
Okay.
I did like parts of it, I'll be very frank, and there are parts I didn't like, but the one I liked the most was the capital cost allowance. And I know that people's eyes glaze over, they hear that, it's accounting terminology, and in plain English, businesses cannot write off a plant, or they buy a big piece of equipment or technology that costs hundreds of millions of dollars, stamping
Or as
machines.
the leader of the NDP said today, they're going to run out and buy limos and jets because there's nothing to stop them from doing it in the proposal.
They're assuming that all capitalists are irrational and they're not trying to grow their company, and I just don't accept that assumption about them. They want to grow their company. But what they're doing, you know, normally you can only expense things like your restaurant meals and trivial things, pens and pencils and papers and computers. This is capital investment in plants that create growth and create jobs.
Right. And to be clear, what's changed today, Toby, what's changed today is the finance minister said, look, to match what's happening in the United States, we're going to let different categories of companies write off 100% of their capital investment in year one right away.
Yep.
And other companies will be allowed to accelerate that, in some cases 3 times faster than they're allowed to do it now, from now till 2027, I think, when the program expires, which is keeping in step with the American program too. Good idea, bad idea?
Well, it's not as bad as it could have been. I mean, the business lobby was pushing for corporate tax cuts and immediate expensing of everything. They went partway there. They gave more of a bonus, of a tax break to business than what I was expecting, and I'm not actually convinced that it's going to have a big impact. What we've had over the past 2 decades is we've had a cut in the marginal effective tax rate for new investment. It's been cut by more than half. And we haven't seen an increase.
I think this takes it down to 13%.
This takes it down to 13%,
which is significantly higher than the American, lower than the Americans.
Yeah, exactly. So what's happened? I mean, I think that the economy has changed in a big way. Some of the biggest corporations in the world, they don't actually have major investments. I mean, I do think that this will have some impact, and it's better than what they might have done in terms of corporate tax cuts. But there's been a massive shift in the way the economy is operating. So, for instance, companies they'll invest, instead of buying servers, they'll buy a cloud service, right? So our economy is changing in very significant ways, and I'm not convinced that this is going to have a big impact. I think it's going to add to the bottom line of these corporations.
Ian,
let me just follow up on that, because I think Toby's actually making a very good point. I mean, first off, let's state the obvious. We're overwhelmingly a service economy. 75–80% of the totality of GDP is now services. And the way I like to put it to my own students is, when they say, well, what's the service versus the other? I said, see all those high-rise buildings in Ottawa and Toronto and Calgary? That's the service economy. They're not making cars on the 75th floor of First Canadian Place, and they're not growing potatoes. So in other words, all those high-rise buildings, government, private sector, hospitals, universities, that's all the service sector. Having said that, there are significant, I mean, we pay, the banks, I'll just use them because I was doing some research on it. They spend something like $1 billion a year, according to the CBA, on upgrading all of those high-speed computers and data links. That's capital investment. And of course, the universities and the hospitals and other places like that, not that we're paying corporate income tax, but you see my point. There is corporate investment there.
Need another tax break in this way, right?
But can I just one more quick point? It is going to juice the manufacturing sector. Okay, it's down to 12–14%, but you tell that to the people in the auto sector, they're not important. And they are still, especially in regional parts of Canada. And this is going to help the auto sector, because to build a parts plant today is enormously expensive, not to mention a full-fledged assembly plant. They're going to benefit from this big time.
As a government, do you have an option? Do you have any option but to help a sizable proportion of your economy compete with the neighbors to the south? When they do stuff, don't we have to do stuff?
I realized in political terms that there was a need for some sort of reaction, but the Parliamentary Budget Office came out with a report basically saying that they really didn't think that the Trump's tax cuts.
Well, that's the corporate tax cuts, but on the investment side,
there's which included full expensing as well in the U.S., and this is allowing that in certain areas. It's not going.
Well, if the idea is to boost the economy, what could he done? What could he have done? What should he have done instead?
Well, I mean, I put this in our pre-budget submission that you should focus on some areas that are going to reduce costs for all businesses. I argued that a national pharmacare plan would be a good way to do that, because it doesn't just benefit the large profitable businesses in that way, and then we also give a tax preference to large foreign e-commerce companies. So they actually pay lower rates of tax, and there's a tax preference there compared to domestic producers. Right. So we've argued that we should get rid of that because it doesn't make any economic sense.
Peter, can I make I think this is a very important distinction. I am not arguing that we need to stimulate the economy. That is why the thing I didn't like, and we'll get to that in a moment, I hope, is that he didn't lay out a path to eliminating the deficit.
That's where we're going.
So let me leave that just aside for just 1 second. I'm not advocating let's pour more gasoline on the fire. We're already stimulating the economy far more than we should with the deficit in Ontario, the monetary stimulus, because it's still way below the normal of where interest rates should be, as well as the federal deficit. We are overstimulating. I'm advocating or supporting the capital cost allowance because we want to create conditions hospitable to growth year in, year out.
Right,
recession.
but he's done it today by deficit spending.
Well,
he's added 14. Well, he's added 17 billion in spending over the next 5 years. 14 billion of it,
for sure.
is for this program to stimulate private companies.
Peter, you're right. And someone like me who is consistent should come back and say, and I'm now about to, yes, I support capital costs. Yes, it had a negative impact on the bottom line. All that means is you have to get out your pencils and your pens and go through the $1/3 of $1 trillion of the government of Canada spending and cut somewhere else, because there is a lot of waste, I believe, in $1/3 of $1 trillion of spending annually by the government of Canada.
And there won't be waste in that in the corporate spending.
Well, I'm assuming the companies buy machinery they need. I mean, I only buy cars and machinery I need, and I'm not a big, rich corporation.
Do we care about the deficit?
Well, rather, I think eventually we do care about the deficit. It's not that high. I mean, it's compared to the other G7, G20 countries, it's not that high. But eventually, we do care about it. There are ways that they could reduce it through some fair tax, through closing tax loopholes, which is one thing that they promised in the last election in different ways.
But people say if you don't set a date for eliminating the deficit, it's permission to never eliminate the deficit.
Peter, I testified before the Finance Committee 10 days ago on this very exact issue, and I got rid of that urban legend, it's just a shibboleth. Well, Canada's a big, rich country. We can afford it. We're not going bankrupt. And I said, of course we're a big, rich country, and of course we can afford deficits. That is a straw argument. That is a false argument. The argument is that we ought not to be squandering scarce public resources when the economy is booming. And one day in the near future, I have argued, and I've argued this elsewhere, and I mean within 5 years or so, I believe, Newfoundland and Labrador and New Brunswick are going to come knocking on the front door of the government of Canada and the Parliament saying, we are broke, we are insolvent, not bankrupt, that's a legal status. Insolvent means you can't pay your bills as they become due. And they're going to say, we need a bailout. And secondly, and my second point very quickly, the PBO showed that over the long run in this country, not a single province's expenditures, current expenditures, not future promises, are sustainable in the long run. In other words, they're all going to need help in the next. So why aren't we saving this money for the rainy day that is inevitably coming down the road, instead of squandering and by pouring gasoline on this roaring fire?
Quick final word to you.
Okay, but at the same time, the PBO said that the federal government is in fine, fiscal, sustainable.
So it can bail them out.
Yeah, exactly. and it's not a major problem. I would have liked the government to look into a more fulsome review of the tax system. in different ways.
Yeah.
Federal revenues and spending as a share of the economy are at a pretty historically low level.
Okay, well,
so if you're calling for
rainy days are coming, the
well,
aging
they're
of the
here, but it's coming down as
But
snow.
listen, the aging of the population is going to reduce long-term GDP growth by about 1.5%, which is going to drive down federal and provincial revenues. And the PBO noted that us boomers our spending on healthcare is going to skyrocket. So tomorrow is not today.
Just reach through that window behind you and pull out some of those $100 bills, and it'll all be taken care of. Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Peter.